Chapter 15, the Bureaucracy. Here are my lecture notes. Chapter 15 is broken down into 4 sections. The first section is Bureaucracy and the Evolution of Public Administration. Here's the narrative. During the post-Jacksonian era of the 19th century, the common charge against the bureaucracy was that it was overly political and corrupt. This changed in the 1880s as the United States began to create a more modern civil service. The civil service grew once again in FDR's administration as he expanded government programs to combat the effects of the Great Depression. The most recent criticism of the federal bureaucracy, notably under President Ronald Reagan, emerged following the second great expansion of the federal government under LBJ in the 1960s. Here are the key terms. So what's a bureaucracy? It's an administrative group of non-elected officials charged with carrying out functions connected to a series of policies and programs. It should be noted that this is largely in the executive branch. Bureaucrats are civil servants or political appointees who fill non-elected positions in government and make up the bureaucracy. Another way of saying this is civil servants, who are the individuals who fill non-elected positions in the government, make up the bureaucracies. So when you hear the terms bureaucrats and civil servants, they're used interchangeably. They essentially mean the same thing. Public administration, what's that? It's the implementation of public policy as well as the academic study that prepares civil servants to work in government. What's a spoil system? It's a system that rewards political loyalties or party support during elections with bureaucratic appointments after victory. Patronage. The use of government positions to reward individuals for their political support. We're coming out of a major election. There will be people who will take part in the spoil system and receive patronages for their help to get their candidate elected. Merit system. It's a system of filling civil service positions by using competitive examinations of value. So if someone's highly qualified and their merits outweigh someone else, and that is why they're selected as a civil servant, is based on the merit system. If they're selected because they help candidate X or Y get elected, that is the spoils system. Section 2. Toward a merit-based civil service. Here's the narrative. The merit-based system of filling jobs in the government bureaucracy elevates the ability and accountability over political loyalties. Unfortunately, this system also has its downsides. The most common complaint is that bureaucrats are no longer as responsive to the elected public officials as they once have been. This, however, may be a necessary trade-off, for the level of efficiency and specialization necessary in a modern world. The merit-based system is ideal. In fact, we need experts in a lot of things in this day and age. So, while it's imperfect, and there certainly is patronage in the spoil system, merit-based can place people in positions to be highly successful. Yet, if you do that, you get away from having people being responsible for their decisions on a political level, which can be good and bad. So how do we determine how to pay these people? There's something called a pay schedule. It's a chart that shows the salary ranges in the different levels of positions vertically and for different ranks of seniority horizontally. This is if you've heard GS5, GS2, GS12, I think up to GS15. That's your pay schedule in a government position. Section 3. Understanding bureaucracies and their types. Here's the narrative. To understand why some bureaucracies act the way they do, sociologists have developed a handful of models. With the exception of the ideal bureaucracy described by Max Weber, that's how you say that, not Weber, Weber is German, these models see bureaucracies as self-serving. So Weber had an ideal bureaucracy, but at the same time we realize there's merit systems and self-serving and special interest and self-interest involved. Harnessing self-serving instincts to make the bureaucracy work the way it was intended is a constant task of elected officials. It's a series of using economic incentives to make people behave. One of the ways elected officials have tried to grapple with this problem is by designing different types of bureaucracies with different functions. These types include cabinet departments, independent regulatory agencies, independent executive agencies, and government corporations. So let's talk more about the models of bureaucracy. The first one is the Weberian, Max Weber model, the Weberian model, a model where agencies are apolitical, hierarchically organized, easy for me to say, and governed by formal procedures. Specialized bureaucrats can be able to be better at solving complex problems. Again, this is kind of pie in the sky, and you'd love it to be that way, but there's some other issues here. The second model is the acquisitive model, a model that proposes that bureaucracies are naturally competitive and power hungry. Now that sounds more like human nature, right? Bureaucrats at higher levels realize that there are limited resources available to all bureaucracies, so there's an incentive to advocate for more resources and expend all existing resources to illustrate a continuous need for resources. This allows bureaucracies to grow unnecessarily and encourages bureaucratic waste. The third model is the monopolistic model, a model that is contrary to the acquisitive model. It's contrary to the acquisitive model that states most bureaucracies operate as monopolies. For example, the IRS in taxation. The IRS has no competition when it comes to the federal income tax. Thus, because there's no competition between organizations, this is what leads to inefficiencies and bureaucratic waste. So it's some interesting takes there. You've got the Weberian model where, here's the ideal. The acquisitive model where, hey, let's spend our money and show that we need, which leads to waste. And the monopolistic model with this, it's not necessarily a competition. There are monopolies. But if you look at issues across bureaucracies, it doesn't matter if you're talking tax and EPA or Amtrak or Department of Homeland Security. There's only so much tax income to go around. There is competition between bureaucracies, even though each bureaucracy may have a monopoly in their little corner of the world. So what are the types of bureaucracies? Well, the first type is the cabinet department. We're familiar with the cabinet, so we've talked about it, especially when we talked about it during the executive discussion about the executive branch. There's Department of State, Treasury Department, Justice Department, Department of the Interior, Department of Agriculture, Commerce Department, Department of Labor, Department of Defense, Transportation, Energy, Housing, and Urban Development, HUD, Health and Human Services, Department of Education, Veteran Affairs, and Homeland Security. There are also independent executive agencies and regulatory agencies, things like the EPA, NASA, FCC, the SEC, Security and Exchange Commission. And then lastly, there are government corporations, or corporations that fulfills an important public interest and is therefore overseen by government authorities to a much larger degree than private organizations or businesses. And a good example of that is Amtrak, the train transportation system. No matter what, when you got bureaucracies, you're going to deal with red tape. What's red tape? The mechanisms, procedures, and rules that must be followed to get something done. To get something done, you got to cut through a lot of red tape. There's a lot of procedures, a lot of rules you got to take care of. Now, to our final section, controlling the bureaucracy. Here's the narrative. To reduce the intra-institutional disagreements the traditional rulemaking process seems to bring, the negotiated rulemaking process was designed to encourage consensus. Both Congress and the President exercise direct oversight over the bureaucracy by holding hearings, making appointments, the executive branch, setting budget allowances, Congress, and citizens exercise their oversight powers through the use of the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, and by voting. Finally, bureaucrats also exercise oversight over their own institutions by using the channels carved out for whistleblowers to call attention to bureaucratic abuses. A whistleblower is a person who publicizes misdeeds committed within a bureaucracy or the other organization. You can have whistleblowers in the private sector too. This leads to something called negotiated rulemaking, which is the experience and competence over political loyalties, a rulemaking process in which neutral advisors convene a committee of those who have vested interest in the proposed rules and help the committee reach a consensus on them. So this tries to take a little bit of the political loyalty out of it. Privatization, it's the measures that incorporate the market forces of the private sector, which is highly competitive and highly efficient, into the function of government to varying degrees. You might see different things outsourced or privatized to be run like a company. And then we covered what we were talking about at whistleblowers just a second ago. So you can have whistleblowers to help control the bureaucracy. You can try to privatize, and then you can have kind of third-party overlook those of interest, making sure that bureaucracies are not being misused through negotiated rulemaking. That is the 4th section, and this wraps up my lecture notes for the bureaucracy, chapter 15. Thanks.